welcome Michael Stearns with My Life and Work in the Land of Enchantment.
Thank you for putting up with me. I would like to start, I'm going to show a little clip of a movie that we just finished, a local film. We kind of finished it up this summer, worked on it for about a year. It was very low budget, so it took a while to put the soundtrack together. Dave Aubrey did a lot of the supervising. Yeah, Dave, yay Dave Aubrey. He did a lot of the supervising of the Foley and the sound effects, things like that, and I did the sound design and the music. It's directed by Jennifer Corcoran. It had its first public screening this past Monday at the American Indian Film Festival in San Francisco. So I'm just going to play a little clip. This is a dream sequence which speaks to me about the reason that I'm here, actually.
Wait, give a guy a break, which is my only book gig. Come on, man. Hey, come on, I got no cash, damn it. I got no cash.
Hey,
nada.
I'm gonna be late.
Help
be
me
back
out.
Sunday. I'll bring some more water.
Come on, man.
Puta motherfucking rattlesnake, Grandma! Grandma?
I came to Santa Fe, to New Mexico, starting out in Vallecitos and winding up in Santa Fe about 22 years ago from Los Angeles. And there was a whole series of events that led up to my moving here. I grew up in Tucson, and while I was in Los Angeles, I was able to work with a film composer who's now passed, Maurice Jarre, who some of you may know did Lawrence of Arabia and Dr. Zhivago and some really big films. And he was my mentor for about 2 years. I worked on 4 films with him. And at the end of that period, I had published a lot of my own music on LPs and cassettes. This was before the days of CDs. I got a call from someone about an IMAX film that they were working on. And they wondered if I'd be interested in doing the music for it. And then I went to a meeting and I met Alton Walpole, who many of you probably know, and Ron Fricke, and that film was Chronos. And that was really my first energetic connection to New Mexico. When I grew up in Tucson, I had spent some summers in New Mexico, but this was like connecting me to New Mexico. And then came Baraka, and Alton, of course, worked on that again, and Dave Aubrey, who you know, was one of the editors on Baraka. And towards the end of Baraka, it was time to leave LA. I had a couple of experiences that were the universe kind of gently pushing me on, saying, okay, you've been here for 15 years, it's time to go elsewhere. And I drove to New Mexico and spent some time staying with Alton and a friend of mine, Ben Shedd, who is an IMAX director who was living in Albuquerque at the time. And, you know, I really got that this was where I was supposed to be. But the thing that really got me here, that was like the icing on the cake, was that in about 1990, I moved here in 1992, a friend of mine up in Castle Valley, Utah, had faxed me an article about these things called singing stones, which are found at on different reservations for the most part. They are, the areas where they're found are considered sacred places. And the stones ring. They literally ring like bells or like gongs. And I wanted to go record these stones. I mean, to me it was fascinating. I was doing kind of this off-the-wall film composing and strange kind of stuff. And in 1991, when I knew that I had to move, my girlfriend at the time and I stayed up one night kind of channeling for each other. And I hadn't told her about these stones at all. And I said, so Janine, where are we going to move? We've got to move here as soon as Baraka is finished. And she said, well, of course, we're moving to New Mexico. And I said, well, why are we moving to New Mexico? And she said, because the stones are singing in New Mexico. So for me, that was like third rolling down the window and it's just having it all come in. It was like, and I think a lot of us are here because we're on a journey which includes sound. It's all about sound. But it's not LA. It's not, there's something special happening here in the earth and with our lives here. Oh, maybe 10 years ago, 12 years ago, I was invited down here to Albuquerque to a meeting for post-production, kind of like this, but broken up into small groups, where we were given a facilitator and a whiteboard, and we were going to create on the whiteboard what our ideal post-production environment would be here in New Mexico. And there were a group of us there. I think Tor and Kat were there from Here Kitty and a few other people. And Eric Whitmore was organizing it. And we spent an afternoon on this whiteboard basically writing down everything we'd like to see happen with post-production here. And at the end of like 3 hours or 4 hours, just writing all these notes down. And we were looking at this whiteboard, and Eric Whitmore was really savvy. He got right in my face. I was sitting at a desk, and he said, so, look at this board. Is this the reason you moved to New Mexico? And I got it. It's like the whiteboard was a recreation of all of our lives in Los Angeles. And I said, no, that's not why I moved here. I moved here because of the sky, because of the earth, looking for a life that would support being rather than whatever that life is in Los Angeles, which served me very well for 15 years. I really needed that. And it serves a lot of people. So I've done a lot of projects here. I've traveled a lot. What I find for myself in post-production is that I do have projects that come from here in New Mexico, and there are a lot of projects that I'm doing outside of the state. Currently, I've been spending a lot of time in Qatar. I was there for 2 months with Ron Fricke shooting a film this year, and I'm working on the music for that film right now for their new Qatar National Museum. Just finished this little feature film that you got to see a little clip of, which was shot here. All the post-production was done here. Everything, the CGI work, there's a whole, you notice the snake come to life. Well, that was a rubber snake, but it comes to life and it looks very real. And that was all done here in Albuquerque. All the sound was done here. The mix was done here. Mixed it in my studio up in Santa Fe. We've got 7.1 surround. That's kind of like the setting. I wanted to set this stage to talk about why we're here. If you have any questions about my life here, I'd love to answer them, or any of the films that I've worked on. We did Samsara while I was here in Santa Fe. That was like 2011, but I did have to go to LA for an extended period of time to work on the music because I was working with Lisa Gerard and Ron and Mark and the crew there really wanted the whole thing to be centralized so we could all be, we worked on it for about 9 months together, just, going back and forth between picture editorial, sound editorial, composing music. So, can we open it up to questions? Because I really want this to be for you. Any questions you have for me, I'd be happy to answer them.
Michael, I have a question. You mentioned that you do the final mix. I've just been reading, there's a new movie out called Interstellar, and it's being panned by the audiences because they can only hear about 30–40% of the dialogue. The sound mix is so overwhelming, and I've always thought dialogue was king, but you can't even hear the dialogue, and I notice that a lot on episodic TV now. Certain of them, they have like folk singers underneath the people that are on the film speaking the dialogue, and you just can't hear the story just doesn't move. I was just wondering what your feeling about that is, and how did it happen, and why is it happening? And I have to believe it's all in the final mix.
Thanks to the miracle of digital electronics, we have these limiters now where you literally can set the threshold and pump the volume all the way up to being within like 0.3 dB of clipping. Everything's 2448 right now. We're all hoping it's going to go 2496. We mastered Samsara at 2496, but most of the industry is running at 2448. So what happens with these limiters is they're taking everything that's lower in level and bringing it up. And the dialogue, which is normally mixed, especially in episodic television, what we call mono up the middle, and it's a drag along. There's no pre-dubbing. On feature films, you've got pre-dubbing, but episodic television is what we call a drag along, where all the tracks are just being dragged along at once. So what happens is you just get everything pumping right up to within 0.3 dB of, whatever the threshold is. If it's television, it's -20. If it's a film, you can go up to like -16. And that's what's going on. I mean, I take a pair of professional earplugs. I had them shoot foam into my ears, and I have a 15 dB set and a 25 dB set, and I wear earplugs when I go to the movies now. I used to only do that at rock concerts, but now I wear them when I go to the movies. And Godzilla was brutal. I mean, it was just brutal. I had to go see it. I'm a Godzilla freak, but it was so loud, and you heard how they did that. They set up a rock concert sound system in a stadium, and all of the Godzilla screams, Sound Deluxe did this, all of this Godzilla screams were put out at like 130 dB through this rock concert PA, and then they were re-recorded to give you the sense that there was this giant ferocious beast. But it was so loud, I mean, I was so glad I had my earplugs. Did I answer your question? I mean, I don't think it's going to go away.
Can you talk about the workflow and the process on working on Chronos and Baraka and Samsara, and how you work with Ron and how that music comes to fruition?
Sure. Ron and I have a really intuitive connection. Some directors and composers do that, so I work with Ron a lot. He usually just kind of talks me through it once. Sometimes we don't even spot it, and then it happens. However music happens, it comes out. That's the way it happens. Chronos was, all three had a different process. Chronos, I wrote all of the music while the crew was out filming. 45 minutes of nonstop on one tape. It was a 2-inch 16-track tape. And I started at the beginning of the tape, and I got to the end of the tape, and that was the soundtrack. And there was never any editing or anything. They just cut the images to the music that I wrote. Baraka was kind of 50-50. Some of the music was written ahead of time. I wrote ahead of time, and they edited to that. For instance, the Varanasi sequence, Dave Aubrey edited that, and he said, look, I really got to have music to edit this to. So I gave him the whole composition, and he edited it. There were other sequences where I scored to picture. Samsara was almost entirely scored to picture. Ron and Mark spent over a year editing what I call Zen style with no sound or music at all. So they created these chunks of film which were pretty locked. And then I came on board. I loaded up a 17-foot U-Haul van with a lot of my studio equipment, took it to LA, set up in, Mark has a very nice home theater, set up in the middle of his home theater. We had the Dolby people come over and recalibrate the theater, and then I was there for about 9 months writing music to picture. And Lisa was there working with Marcello Di Francisci at his studio out in Pasadena, so I would, like every other day, I'd have to go out to Pasadena and sit with them, and then I'd come back and then I'd work for a while. But that was a real back and forth. The editorial for Samsara and my setup were in the same building, so I could literally, in 30 seconds, I could walk to editorial and give them a new hard drive or even send it over Ethernet or whatever. So there was a real back and forth on Samsara, the way it developed. But all the 3 films had 3 different processes. And then I do all my own music mixing, so I mixed all the music, both Lisa's music and my own music, and the music we did together for Samsara in Mark's home theater. And then we took it to 424, which is a stage, beautiful stage in the foothills in Los Angeles in a private home. Gigantic stage. I mean, the room is probably as wide as this room in a private home. It's wild. And we did the final mix there. They were working on Dolphin Tale and the Hawaiian film, The Ancestors with George Clooney at the same time. So the 3 of us. It's a stage where you don't book it for a week the way you do on a normal stage at Tadeo or Skywalker. You book it for like, I'm going to come in at 2 in the morning, I'm going to work till 7 in the morning, something like that. And so there's a lot of open time when other films are not using the stage. So those are those 3 films. This is called She Sings to the Stars. And that'll probably be, it's going to just be at festivals here for a little while, and then you'll probably see it like in Santa Fe, it'll be CCA. It'll be playing someplace here in Albuquerque. I'm sure it's going to play here in New Mexico.
How much of your composition is done with ink and paper as opposed to electroacoustic, real-time improvising and orchestrating to your own work?
Right. I don't read music. I don't write music. It's always been, for me, I sit and it just happens. And if I'm scoring a picture, I'm looking at the picture. Now, that said, I spent 2 years working with Maurice Jarre, who's writing everything to paper. And I've worked with Alan Silvestri and other composers, and so I have a real sense of what that process is. That's just not my process. Sometimes I need to print out music for source music like a small jazz combo where somebody will play. Like about 10 years ago, I did an IMAX film here, and John Bartlett acted as the music contractor for that. And I wrote all the music into the computer, and the computer printed out the parts. We took it into a studio here in Albuquerque, and the musicians played it. So that's more my process. If I have to work with music in print, then I can't write it out myself. The downside of that is I can't write it out myself. The good side is that what I see as the upside is I do a lot of my work is not in 12 equal. It's not in 12 tone. It's like in Samsara, there were a number of pieces where I was working in 21 tone. I was working in whatever the Balinese gamelan orchestra that I was working with is, it's not even any tone. It's just, they work with beat frequencies, which means they're concerned with the beat frequencies between any two notes because that attracts spirits, ancestors. Their concept of music is just in a different place than Western music entirely. So because I don't write music, I feel very free to explore the music of the world, which for the most part is not 12-tone equal. 12-tone equal is, which we're all used to. When we hear that other intonations, oftentimes we go, "Ooh, it sounds out of tune, sounds weird." But it's only because we've been listening to 12 equal for so long. Actually, 12 equal is out of tune. There is no metaphor in the natural world for 12 equal. It was invented by these guys with the clavier keyboard. It was invented at the same time as the clavier keyboard so that octaves could modulate equally up and down the keyboard. But actually, in real life, in the natural world, octaves are more fractal based. They don't modulate up and down equally. So when you get used to hearing other systems of intonation, and then you come back to equal temper, it sounds out of tune the same way that the other systems sound out of tune to us because we're so used to hearing equal temper. And equal temper it's great in that it's like, I call it the Disneyfication of the world. It's like we started out with synthesizers, and now there's piano keyboards that are married to synthesizers. But in the old days, like my big Serge system, there was no 12-tone keyboard. It was just these like little elevator pads that I would touch. And I could set it up for any intonation I wanted to. So that's the long answer to your question is I don't write it down. Sometimes I have to print it out, but I don't write it down.
When talking about the not 12-tone, the more, how do you make your keyboard so it actually does that? Because all keyboards are normally in 12-tone. How do you actually transpose? I mean, like,
right.
What's your process?
Right. Well, I don't own a generalized keyboard, but now you can buy generalized keyboards which allow you, they're not black and white keys, that allow you to, you can not only play left to right, but you can play up and down. They're very cool, but I haven't had the funds to resource one of those. So my process is that I have this little box which will take the keyboard and basically just the regular 12-tone keyboard and turn it into anything I want to turn it into. Like I can make, I can do 21-tone, 52-tone, 41-tone, whatever I want to do, playing in the cracks between the keys. So basically, you start, and then as you go up, the octave, you just don't hit the octave like C to C. It's not there at C. It might be at G, or it might be somewhere up there. That's the way I do it.
That's really cool. When you played the clip earlier, there was some interesting sound design kind of vocalized elements that were in there.
Yeah.
Was that actual people singing?
Yes.
That
was an actual Hopi snake dance chant. And I wanted to give it the feeling of it being out, not just so literal. So I took the chant and I stretched it. I think I stretched it out about somewhere between 2 and 4 times, so that you know it's a human voice and you are aware that it's a chant and it can be affecting to your nervous system, but it's not what we're used to hearing. Like if you just heard that, it would just sound like you were listening to KUNM on a Sunday or something, you know. And that wasn't what I wanted to feel. I mean, he's in dream time. This is a medicine dream. There's a communication between different aspects of himself that are going on. And I wanted to convey that, and that's why I chose to it is sound design, chose to do that with that.
Cool. Thank you.
Just any advice for aspiring producers, scorers, just getting into this industry?
Well, for me, there was no method to it for me, but I did it back before there were schools when you could go and learn how to do it and that sort of thing. So for me, it was getting myself on board with Maurice Jarre, for instance, and hanging out with him for 2 years, which meant I had to be in LA. And if you're going to work with any of the A-list composers, you got to be where they are. Alan Silvestri is up in Carmel Valley, you know. Jamie Horner is in London. You know, Hans Zimmer is in LA, and Media Ventures is always taking in new crew to learn, you know. But you might end up scoring a quarter of a Hans Zimmer film, and you won't get any credit for it. That's Hollywood, you know. That's the way it goes. But that's, I mean, for me, it was, I learned so much in those 2 years that I spent with Maurice. Just amazing. And it wasn't just about scoring to music. I mean, back in those days, we were working with 2-inch 24-track tape recorders, and it took, you know, nowadays, you start your computer, and you're in sync. But in those days, it took 30 seconds. You had to put a 45-second leader before each cue of music, because it took 30 seconds for the machines to get in sync before you could do your overdub or whatever it was you were doing. And I learned so much about life from Maurice, you know, going out to dinner with him every night. And, you know, we worked from noon until 2, 3 o'clock every morning. I'd be driving back over the, you know, on Coldwater Canyon, and there'd be coyotes out and deer. And, I mean, it was just like this whole other realm or world. And when you get, you know, when you really get committed to doing that, if you're into scoring, then and you apprentice with somebody or whatever, you know you're working crazy hours. You're not getting much sleep. It's a wonderful experience and it's great. And then if you're talking about just post-production sound, boy, you know, being in New Mexico, you have to wear a lot of hats. You have to have a lot of chops. So I do everything here. I mean, I write music, I edit music, I do sound design. Some projects I'm the supervising sound editor, which means I'm in charge of everything. I'm a mixer. And you just, as you are unfolding as a human being, you know, opportunities come to you, and then you go, yes, I'm going to go down this stream, or, you know, whatever you're going to do. So you just kind of have to pay attention, seeing what's being offered to you, and start wherever you're at. I mean, wherever that first step is, take the step, and the next step will be there, because that's the way the universe works.
I'm trying to think of how to encapsulate this. I come from a dance background, and one of the things that I experienced that I think crosses over into your area of expertise, it was a fairly famous documentary about choreographer Jiri Kilian, who had gone out to the outback to study Aboriginals, and he wanted to really take what their movements were and turn them into this piece. Spent all this time, there was all this drama, it was really intense and whatever, and he gets back and they won't give him clearances to do their movements because they're sacred and they're not allowed to be seen outside of that ceremony. Yeah. He doesn't know that until he gets to New York and he has to re-choreograph the whole thing. I'm assuming it's the same thing with sound as well, and songs, and so if you're dealing with that, how do you negotiate that? Do you just retranslate it? Have you had ways that you negotiate with cultures and tribes and stuff on that?
Sure, you bet. Well, the first thing you ask is, what do you need? I mean, this is what we like to do. What do you need? I don't know if you've seen Baraka, but there's a whole sequence there with a kaiapó in Brazil, in the middle of the rainforest, south of Marabá, at one of their villages. So I flew in with the crew to record the dances that you see in the film. And before we got there, Flavio, who was the location coordinator, or Dudu, his wife, had flown in, and asked the chief, what do you need? This is what we want to do, and we want to be sure that we're cleared to use this material out in the world. What's the reciprocity? And the chief said, fish hooks. They live on this river, In fact, there's a little tiny, it's really wild, there's a little tiny landing strip. We landed, it just cut out of the jungle. The plane hit the treetops at the end of the runway, and then it's not really a runway, it's just like a cleared out space. And when we got out of the plane, we looked at the whole underside of the wings of the plane were just covered in green chlorophyll. It was just really wild. But they wanted fish hooks, so we took in a huge thing of fishing gear. And that probably helped them for the next 10 years. You know, that's all they need. They've got plantains and, you know, mangoes and bananas and everything just growing there. And they shoot a tapir if they want red meat with a blow dart. But fish, they're fish in the river all the time. It's a resource for them. That's what they wanted, fish hooks.
Did you ever have a project where you had to recalibrate because they weren't going to allow you to utilize their sounds or their...
No, I don't think so, because we went, either myself or the production company went into the situation knowing that. I mean, I've definitely had situations where I've been denied access. When the Singing Stones that I was talking about when I first came out, I think I was here for 2 years, 1992, 93, and then in 94 I decided I wanted to do the Singing Stones project, which I did end up doing. But I spent 2 months making contact with representatives from the different tribes on whose reservations these sacred sites were, and nobody would talk to me about it. Nothing. Zero. So I called my friend Ron Sunsinger and I said, "Hey Ron, you want to do a project with me?" In 2 days, he had 21 pages of notes and permissions, and 2 weeks later, we were in the car going around recording these things. So yeah, I mean, I've experienced it personally.
Thank you.
What keeps me working and living in Santa Fe?
I'm sorry if that got asked. I wasn't
No.
paying attention.
I moved here in 1992. I think it was 1994. A person who's passed on, who lived in Phoenix, who was my astrologer, she called me up out of the blue and she said, "You know, you're not going to believe this, but next year at this time, you're going to be married and you're going to have a kid." And it was like, well, that was not in my plans at all. Well, a year later, I went to Bali and I had this amazing medicine dream. A year later, I was married and I had a child in 1995. And so I've had 2 children. I was married, I had 2 children, divorced, and I keep traveling, and I keep coming back, and when I come, if I'm gone, like I was 2 months in Qatar this year, I come back and I ask the question, is this right? Am I still supposed to be here? And immediately I get a big yes, you know. It's right for me.
Hi, Michael. I want to know if you have some project that you dream about that you didn't realize it yet.
When yeah, of course, yeah, yes. I kind of got known, if that's the word, as an analog synthesist. I had this gigantic, what they call a modular analog synthesizer, made by a company called Serge up in San Francisco, and then they moved to Los Angeles. And I did, you know, like the Chronos soundtracks, probably 75%. I recorded it on that instrument. And it's not a modern digital instrument or even a modern analog instrument. You can't synchronize it to anything. It's just, you know, just an amazing thing. You have to take patch cords and plug the wires in. And I had that until about the year, 1997, something like that. Or no, sorry, 1987, 89. And then so much of it broke that I couldn't use it anymore. It just wasn't functioning. And a guy called me up and he said, I hear you got this Serge synthesizer. How much do you want to sell it for? I sold it to him. And then about 2 years ago, I got interested in modular synthesis again. It's like it reignited in me. And now there are probably 2 or 3 dozen companies who make these amazing synthesizer modules where you have to build the synthesizer yourself out of different modules and patch it together. Back in those days, there was just Serge, Buchla, and Moog, and that was it. There were just 3. Or EML in the UK, but I mean, that was basically it. So this summer, I finally had some free time, and I started building. The rule is I buy everything used. So I go to eBay, and I buy these used modules. And so I've taken over the guest bedroom upstairs, building this module. And that's my dream project right now. It's like when I go to the studio, it's to work. It's like, okay, this is work. Sometimes they're really wonderful projects like the project She Sings to the Stars that I showed you the clip of. But sometimes it's work. And, you know, I find that when it's a project that's about work, then there's something else for me to learn. Like it's about the interactions with certain people in the production company or other people on the sound crew or whatever. There's always something to learn. But our guest bedroom now is like my hideaway. That's where I get excited, you know. Okay?
What do you think? Good job. You're wonderful. Good. Michael Stearns.